She wouldn't bow like everyone else. The royal guard's next move changed the room. The guard's eyes found her before anyone else did. That was the thing nobody talked about afterward, when the video spread and the arguments started and everyone had an opinion about what they saw. Nobody mentioned that it was the guard who noticed first. Not the crowd, not the cameras, him. And in the 3 seconds it took him to understand what he was looking at, something shifted in his chest that he would spend the next several weeks trying to name. Her name was Caroline Marsh. She was 51 years old, and she was standing in the 3rd row of the public viewing area inside the east corridor of Kensington Hall, a long marble passage that smelled of old wood and cleaned stone, the kind of place that makes you feel small not because it wants to intimidate you, but simply because it was built in an era when grandness was the only language available. The corridor was lined on both sides with members of the public who had waited, in some cases for hours, to be part of this moment. A senior member of the royal family was passing through on a formal visit. The protocol was simple and everyone knew it. You stood. You lowered your head. You did not make eye contact. You waited until the procession had passed, and then you straightened up and felt briefly proud that you had done the correct thing. Hundreds of people did exactly that. Caroline did not. She stood straight, both feet planted on the pale stone floor, her hands folded in front of her, not crossed over her chest, not gripping anything, just resting there one over the other, the way a person stands when they are completely at peace with where they are and what they are doing. Her chin was level. Her eyes were forward. She was not making a scene. She was not holding a sign or saying anything or drawing attention to herself in any theatrical way. She was simply standing the way she stood everywhere, which was upright, which was the only way she had left. The woman to her right bowed so low her earrings swung forward. The man to her left dipped his head and kept it there like a bird drinking. Caroline did not move. The guard's name was Oliver Crane. He was 38 years old and had served in ceremonial duties for 11 years, long enough that the uniform felt like a second skin, and long enough that he could read a crowd the way a sailor reads water, knowing instinctively where the current was wrong before he could articulate why. He was positioned 12 feet from her, second in the outer formation, close enough to see the detail of her face. He had noticed dozens of protocol breaches in his career. Tourists who forgot, children who were too young to understand, elderly people whose knees would not cooperate. He had seen deliberate provocations too, people who came specifically to make a point, whose whole body language was a performance of refusal. He knew the difference. This was not any of those things. Caroline Marsh was not forgetting. She was not performing. She was not trembling with the effort of holding herself upright in the way that people do when they are fighting their own instinct to comply. She was simply standing, like it was the most natural thing in the world, because for her it was. The procession moved at a steady pace. The sound in the corridor was the soft percussion of formal footsteps, the low rustle of formal clothing, the near silence that crowds produce when they have collectively decided to be reverent. The royal party had entered from the north end and was moving south. In 40 seconds, give or take, they would pass Caroline's position. Oliver watched her for those 40 seconds. He had a job to do, and he did not leave his post, but his eyes stayed on her, not the way a guard watches a threat, the way a person watches something they recognize without being able to say from where. She never looked at him. She did not scan the room self-consciously. She did not check to see who had noticed. She looked at the procession when it came into her line of sight the way anyone looks at something passing, with attention, with interest, without performance. The procession reached her position. The bend of heads on either side of her deepened, as if the row itself was bowing, as if she were the only vertical thing left in the frame. She stood. Oliver Crane stepped out of formation. He had not planned to. That was the part he could never fully explain, not to his supervisor who asked him afterward, not to the journalist who called 3 weeks later, not to himself when he lay awake at 2 in the morning turning it over. He had not made a decision. His body had made it for him, the way the body sometimes does when it knows something the mind has not caught up to yet. He walked toward her. 12 feet, then 10, then 6. The procession had not stopped. The royal party moved at its steady pace, the footsteps continuing their soft rhythm, and nobody in the formal party seemed to register what one guard was doing 12 feet to their left, because that was the nature of ceremony. It was designed to keep your eyes forward. The crowd noticed. The murmur started at the edges and moved inward, the way sound moves through a room when something changes. The woman with the swinging earrings straightened up slightly and cut her eyes sideways. The man on Caroline's left lifted his head a half-inch. Oliver stopped in front of Caroline Marsh. She looked at him for the first time. His expression was not stern. It was not apologetic. It was something more specific than either of those things, something that required a longer word that he did not have on hand. He held her gaze for 1 second. Then he bowed. Not the shallow dip of formality, not the brief nod that covers obligation. A full bow from the waist, deliberate and unhurried, his eyes going to the floor, his body folding with the kind of ease that comes from genuinely meaning something. The corridor went completely silent. The woman with the swinging earrings made a sound she would later be embarrassed about, a small involuntary noise somewhere between a gasp and a syllable. Caroline Marsh looked at him. The expression on her face did not rearrange itself into surprise or gratitude or emotion of the performable kind. She simply looked at him, and then she nodded once, a small and complete gesture, the way you acknowledge something true. Oliver straightened up. He returned to his post. The procession finished its passage through the east corridor, and the doors at the south end opened, and the moment was over formally, the way all formal moments end. The crowd began to exhale. People turned to each other. Phones appeared. The corridor filled again with ordinary sound. But something had changed in the room, and everyone who had been inside it knew it, even if they could not have said precisely what. A 17-year-old named Grace Whitfield had been standing 4 rows back. She had her phone out because she had been filming the procession, the way young people film everything now, not out of disrespect but out of the habit of capturing things before they disappear. She had caught all of it, Oliver stepping out, the walk, the bow, the nod, the return. 12 seconds of footage. She did not post it immediately. She watched it back twice, standing in the corridor with the crowd still moving around her, and she felt something she did not have a word for at 17, but would recognize later in life as the particular feeling of having witnessed something quietly enormous. She posted it that evening. By midnight it had been watched 40,000 times. By the following morning, the number had a comma in it that kept moving right. And Caroline Marsh, who had gone home that afternoon and made a cup of tea and sat by the window without turning on the television, had no idea. She had not slept properly in 4 years. This was not a complaint, or at least she did not frame it as one. It was simply a fact about her life, the way the color of her kitchen walls was a fact, something true and present that she had stopped thinking about changing. She would go to bed at a reasonable hour and lie in the dark with her eyes open and her mind running its quiet, persistent inventory of everything she had lost. And somewhere between 2 and 4 in the morning, she would finally slip under. And then the alarm would pull her back up, and she would make coffee and face the day with the particular alertness of someone who has learned to function on less than they need. 4 years ago, her daughter had died. Her name was Lily, and she was 23 years old when it happened, and she had been studying architecture, and she loved old buildings the way some people love music, viscerally, with her whole body, the way she would stop in the middle of a sentence if she saw a roofline she found interesting and just look at it, just pause and look. And Caroline had found this habit annoying when Lily was 17, and had spent the last 4 years wishing she could stand on any street corner in the world and watch her daughter stop mid-sentence and look at a roofline one more time. The illness had been fast. That was what the doctor said, as though speed were a mercy. Maybe it was. Caroline was not sure. Fast meant there was not enough time to prepare. But then she was not sure preparation was possible for something like this regardless of time. So maybe fast was better, or maybe it was just different, one flavor of unbearable compared to another. What she knew was this. She had stood at the graveside in November, in the kind of rain that is not dramatic, just persistent and cold, and something in her spine had straightened. She could feel it happening, a physical shift, like a structure deciding not to collapse. She had stood completely upright in that rain, and she had not bent, and she had not looked at the ground, and she had kept her eyes on the plain wooden box that held everything she had not finished saying to her daughter, and she had understood in that moment, without language, without thought, that she would not bow to anything again. Not because she was angry, not because she was making a statement, but because bowing felt like folding, and folding felt like agreeing that this was something she could absorb by getting smaller, and it was not. She was not smaller. She was broken open, which is not the same as small. She did not tell anyone this. She went back to her job, which was teaching primary school children to read, and she sat in small chairs in small classrooms, and she helped 6-year-olds learn that letters made sounds and sounds made words and words were the beginning of everything. And she found in this work the only comfort she trusted, which was the comfort of being useful. She went to the supermarket. She called her sister on Sundays. She took long walks on Saturday mornings because Lily had loved long walks, and because movement was the only thing that felt honest when the weight of stillness got too heavy. She had not planned to be at Kensington Hall that afternoon. A colleague at the school, a younger teacher named Fiona, had 2 tickets to the public viewing and could not go because her youngest had a fever and needed collecting from nursery. She had offered the tickets to the staff room in general, the way people offer things they cannot use, half expecting no one to take them. Caroline had been standing by the kettle. She had taken them not because she particularly wanted to attend, but because she had nothing else to do that afternoon, and because saying yes to things had become a practice she was trying to maintain, a small deliberate exercise in staying connected to the world. She had arrived at the hall and found her place in the 3rd row, and looked at the marble corridor and thought about what Lily would have said about the architecture, which was probably something precise and enthusiastic that would have made Caroline smile even if she did not fully understand it. The crowd had filled in around her. The procession had been announced. And when the moment came, and the person to her right began to bow, and the person to her left began to bow, and the wave of deference moved through the crowd like a tide, Caroline had simply stayed where she was, not because she had thought about it, not because she had made a choice in the way that choices feel deliberate, but because her body had learned in the rain in November that bowing was not a thing it did anymore, and it had not forgotten. She had not thought about the guard watching her. She had not thought about the cameras. She had not thought about anything except standing in a beautiful old corridor in a building Lily would have loved, and being, for one more hour, a person who was still here. When the guard stepped out of his position and walked toward her, her first thought was practical. She thought he was going to ask her to step back or step aside or in some way correct her position. She had no prepared response to this. She had no argument ready. She was simply going to tell him the truth, which was that she meant no disrespect to anyone, and that she was sorry if she had caused a problem, and that she would leave quietly if that was what was needed. She looked at him. He did not ask her to leave. He bowed. In the 4 years since November, Caroline Marsh had not cried in public. She had cried at home, alone, with the curtains closed, the way she did everything difficult, privately and without an audience. She had gotten very good at holding her face in place when she was outside, a skill she had not known she was developing until she realized one day that she could not remember the last time she had let anything show in a public place. She held her face in place now, but something moved in her chest, deep and private, like something that had been sealed shifting slightly in its container. She nodded at him. He straightened. He walked back to his post. The corridor continued its ceremonial business. And Caroline stood where she was, upright, her hands folded one over the other, looking forward, holding herself the only way she knew how. Nobody around her said anything to her directly. The woman with the earrings looked at her sideways and then looked away. The man to her left resumed his attention forward. The crowd moved around her like water around a stone. She stayed until the end of the formal viewing period, and then she joined the slow movement of people toward the exit, and she handed in her visitor's badge at the front desk, and she walked out into the afternoon air, and she took the bus home. She made a cup of tea. She sat by the window. She watched the light change over the street outside, the way the afternoon gold moved across the rooftops of the houses opposite, and she thought about Lily, who would have had something to say about the angle of that light and the way it hit the chimney stacks, something architectural and precise and enthusiastic. She did not think about the guard. She did not think about what the crowd had seen. She thought about the light and the chimney stacks and a girl who used to stop in the middle of sentences to look at buildings. And she sat with all of it until the tea was gone and the light had shifted and the evening came in around the edges of the day and covered everything over. On the other side of the city, Oliver Crane sat in his car in the staff parking area after the end of his shift and turned his phone over in his hands without looking at it, thinking about his grandmother, who had lived through something the history books mentioned in a single paragraph, who had come out on the other side of it with her spine so straight it looked like architecture, who had told him once, very quietly, over a kitchen table, that the only thing you owe the world is to still be standing. He had recognized it. That was all. He put his phone in his pocket and drove home through the ordinary evening traffic, through the ordinary city, through the ordinary world that had no idea what had happened in that corridor and would not know until morning. By then, of course, it would know. By then, everything would be different. And neither of them would be ready for it. The video was 12 seconds long. It had been shot on a phone, slightly tilted, with the automatic exposure flickering, because the corridor was a mix of natural and artificial light, the kind of footage that has a rawness to it that no professional camera could have faked. You could see the procession in soft focus in the background and then Oliver, sharp and clear, walking toward a woman the camera had not yet found. Then it found her. Caroline upright, hands folded, while the entire row around her bent like grass in wind. Oliver stopping in front of her. The pause, the bow, her nod. His return to position. 12 seconds. Grace Whitfield had captioned it with 4 words, "I don't understand this." Which was, it turned out, exactly the right caption. Because nobody understood it, and the not understanding was the thing that made it impossible to stop watching. By 7 in the morning after, it had been shared across 3 continents. By 9, every major news outlet in the country had a tab open on it somewhere, and the question being asked in newsrooms and on social media and over breakfast tables and in office kitchens was the same question Grace had asked, which was, what exactly had just happened? The answers people offered said more about them than about Oliver or Caroline. There were people who said it was a breach of protocol, a soldier out of line, an erosion of the dignity that ceremony is meant to protect. There were people who said it was the most important thing a person in uniform had done publicly in years. There were people who wanted to know who the woman was and why she had not bowed, and their reasons for wanting to know split cleanly down the middle between those who wanted to celebrate her and those who wanted to correct her. There were people who watched it and said nothing and felt something they could not name. Grace Whitfield woke up to find her phone making sounds it had never made before, a kind of digital vibration that would not stop, notification after notification stacking up like an incoming tide. She sat up in her bedroom, in the house she shared with her parents in East London, and she read the numbers on her screen, and she felt a specific kind of fear that teenagers feel when something they have done in private suddenly belongs to the world. Not regret, not pride. Just the sudden vertiginous awareness that something is no longer yours. She called her mother into the room. Her mother looked at the screen for a long moment and then said, very quietly, "Call the school and say you'll be late." A journalist named Philip Holt, who worked for one of the larger national papers and who had covered royal events for 7 years, watched the video on his kitchen counter at 7:40 in the morning while his coffee brewed, and he watched it 4 times in a row. And on the 4th viewing he stopped it at the moment of the bow and he looked at Oliver's posture, the angle of the back, the downward placement of the eyes. And he understood with the certainty of someone who had spent 7 years watching people perform deference that this was not performance. He opened his laptop. He had 3 hours before his editor's morning meeting. He started with the guard. Oliver Crane was not difficult to find, in the way that public servants at public institutions are never entirely private, his name appearing in the formal program of the event, which was available on the official website of the hall. Philip called the press office. The press office said they were aware of the footage and were not making any comment at this time. Philip had expected this. He thanked them politely and began working the other angle. He needed to find the woman. This took longer. Caroline was not a public figure. She had no social media presence that he could locate, no professional profile beyond a listing on her school staff page which had her name and her subject and a small photograph that matched the face in the video. He looked at the photograph for a moment. The same quality was there, even in a staff photo, a stillness that was not coldness, a composure that was not performance. He called the school. The school's office staff were pleasant and entirely unhelpful, which was exactly what they were supposed to be. He went back to the video. He watched it one more time and then he closed his laptop, and he sat at his kitchen counter with his coffee, and he thought about what he was doing and whether he should do it. He had been in this business long enough to know that the story the world was building around those 12 seconds was not necessarily the story that had actually happened. And he had learned, over 7 years of watching ceremony, that the space between public perception and private truth was where the actual human beings lived. He was a journalist. His job was to find those human beings. But he was also, on his better days, something else, a person who understood that not every story was his to tell. He called his editor. She picked up on the second ring and said she had been about to call him. He told her he was on it. She told him the digital desk was already seeing traffic numbers that made the morning meeting irrelevant, and asked him what angle he was taking. He said he wanted to find the woman. There was a pause. Then his editor, who had been in the business longer than he had, and who was not known for caution, said, carefully. He said yes. He meant it. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, in a staff room that smelled of instant coffee and dry erase markers, a young teacher named Fiona looked at her phone, and then looked at the door through which Caroline Marsh had just walked, sensibly dressed, carrying a tote bag with a small red apple embroidered on it, looking entirely like a woman who had not been watched by half the internet overnight. Fiona said nothing. She had not yet decided what to say. Caroline set down her tote bag and poured a cup of coffee and looked at the rota for the morning and did not look at her phone, which was face down on the table beside her, because she never looked at her phone before 10, not since Lily, because the morning hours were hers and she protected them. The bell rang. She picked up her reading group folder and went to her classroom. 6 children were already seated. They were 6 years old and they wanted to know everything, and they needed her full attention, and she gave it to them completely, the way she always did, which was the thing she was best at, which was being entirely present for the person in front of her, a skill she had built by necessity in the years since November, when being present was the only alternative to being nowhere at all. She did not find out about the video until lunchtime. Fiona found her in the corridor, outside the staff kitchen, with her phone turned outward like a piece of evidence. She said, "Caroline, have you seen this?" Caroline looked at the screen. She watched the 12 seconds. She stood in the corridor for a moment with the phone in Fiona's hand, and the sounds of the school around her, children's voices from the courtyard, a distant bell, the specific institutional hum of a building full of small people who needed things. She said, "Oh, just that." Fiona waited for more. Caroline handed the phone back and said, "Is my next group in yet?" and went to her classroom. Fiona stood in the corridor with her phone and her open mouth, and the very strong feeling of having been in the presence of something she did not understand, but would probably think about for a very long time. Philip Holt spent the day working his contacts. By 3 in the afternoon, he had confirmed through a source at the hall that the guard in the video was indeed Oliver Crane, 11-year veteran. No prior disciplinary actions, no public profile, no comment forthcoming from either him or the institution. By 4:30, the same source told him quietly, with the air of someone doing a favor they expected to be remembered, that the guard had requested a brief meeting with his supervisor that morning, of his own initiative, and that the meeting had been described by those adjacent to it as short and apparently concluded without issue. Philip wrote that down. A guard who acts outside protocol in full view of the public and then goes straight to his supervisor the next morning, not to explain himself, not to apologize as far as Philip could determine, just to have the conversation, just to account for himself. Philip found this detail interesting in a specific way, the way that details are interesting when they reveal character rather than circumstance. He sent an email to the school, to Caroline specifically, through the school's general inquiry address, marked for her attention, professional and brief, identifying himself honestly and telling her that he was not looking for a headline, that he was interested in the truth of what had happened, and that he would understand entirely if she did not want to speak with him. He did not expect a reply that day. He got one at 6:47 in the evening. It said, "I read your work. You can call me tomorrow at 9 if you have questions. I may not answer all of them." He read it twice. He wrote back, "Thank you, 9 is perfect." He closed his laptop. Outside his window, the city was doing what it always did in the evening, moving and lit and indifferent to any individual story, full of people living their private interior lives in the middle of the public world. Somewhere in that city, Oliver Crane was home, and his phone was doing the same thing Grace Whitfield's phone had done the night before, stacking notifications he was not reading, because he had turned the sound off and put it face down on the kitchen table, and he was standing at his stove making pasta, the ordinary ritual of a man who lived alone and cooked for himself, and had no interest tonight in being the story everyone was telling. His grandmother had called, though. He had answered that one. She had said nothing for a moment when he picked up, and then she had said, in the quiet way she had of saying important things, "I saw it," and then nothing else, just, "I saw it." He had said, "Good." She had said, "Yes." They had stayed on the phone for another 10 minutes talking about ordinary things, her garden, the weather, the program she had been watching, and he had felt, in that 10 minutes, the specific comfort of being known without having to explain yourself. He ate his pasta. He did not look at the phone. He was not ready for the next part yet, the part where everyone had an opinion and everyone wanted a quote, and everyone needed him to be something definable, a symbol or a statement or a lesson, something that fit into the shape of the story they had already decided they were telling. He would deal with it. But not tonight. Tonight he was just a man who had done what seemed correct to him in a corridor at 3 in the afternoon, for reasons that were his own, and he was at home eating pasta, and outside the window the city was ordinary and lit, and entirely beautiful in the way that ordinary things are beautiful when you are paying attention. He washed his bowl. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and thought about an old woman's garden and the particular quality of stillness in a marble corridor, and a single nod that had carried, in his reading of it, more than most conversations carry in an hour. He thought it was the right thing. And then finally he slept. Philip Holt had been a journalist for 12 years. He had interviewed people who had survived extraordinary things. He had sat across from people carrying grief the size of weather systems, people whose private lives had been lit up by events too large to manage, people who had become symbols before they had a chance to agree to it. He had learned over 12 years to distinguish between the people who wanted to be known and the people who were willing to be known, which were not the same thing at all. Caroline Marsh, he understood within the first 4 minutes of their phone call, was neither. She was a person who was answering questions because she had decided it was more accurate than silence, and who would stop answering when accuracy was no longer the object. He had his notebook open. He had his list of questions. He started with the simple ones. She told him her name, her age, her job. Yes, that was her in the video. Yes, she had been at the hall. No, she had not planned any kind of statement. He asked why she had not bowed. There was a pause, not a long one, the pause of someone choosing the precise word. She said, "I wasn't making a point, I was just tired." He wrote that down. He let the silence sit for a moment, which was a technique he had learned and which worked about half the time. It worked. She said, "I lost my daughter 4 years ago, and after that bowing felt like agreeing to get smaller. I'm not smaller, so I don't bow." He wrote that down. He was aware of his own breathing. He said, "I'm sorry about your daughter." She said, "Thank you." He asked if she had known the guard would react the way he did. She said, "I thought he was going to ask me to leave. I had decided I would go quietly." He asked what she had felt when he bowed instead. Another pause, longer this time. She said, "I'm not going to answer that one." He said, "That's fair." He asked if she had a message, anything she wanted people to take from what had happened. She said no. He waited. She said, "I think people are going to take what they need from it anyway. That's what people do. They see what they're looking for." He asked what she saw. She said, "A man who recognized something. I don't know how, but he did." Philip put down his pen. He said, "Is there anything you want to add? Anything you want to make sure gets into the piece?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said her name was Lily. She loved old buildings. "That's all I want people to know." He wrote Lily, old buildings. He thanked her. She said, "I hope you write it honestly." He said, "I'll try." They ended the call. He sat at his desk and looked at his notebook. He did not call Oliver Crane. He had tried twice through the official channels, and both attempts had come back marked no comment, which he respected. He had enough. He had more than enough. He had the kind of story that writes itself if you let it, which is the only kind worth writing. He started writing. He wrote for 6 hours. He wrote about a marble corridor and a woman who had learned, in a cemetery in November rain, that her body would not fold anymore. He wrote about a guard who had done one unscripted thing in 11 years and had known in the doing of it that it was correct. He wrote about 12 seconds of footage and the 40,000 people who had watched it by midnight and the 200,000 who had watched it by morning, and the conversations happening in kitchen tables and office corridors and comment sections across the country, all of them circling the same question from different directions. He wrote about Lily. He wrote a single paragraph about her, drawn from what Caroline had told him, keeping it to the truth and only the truth. A young woman who loved old buildings, who had died too young, whose mother had learned from her absence how to stand. He put that paragraph near the end. He read the whole piece back. He changed 6 words and a comma. He sent it to his editor at midnight. She called him at midnight 12. She said, "This is the one." He said, "I know." She said, "How are you?" He said, "Fine." He was not entirely fine, but he was the kind of fine that comes from having done something as well as you could do it, which is a specific and honest kind of fine, available only to people who have used up everything they had. The piece ran the next morning. Within 2 hours, it had been read more than the video had been watched. Within 4 hours, Caroline's school had fielded 11 media inquiries, and the head teacher had sent a gentle email to all staff saying that the school was proud of its staff members and was committed to protecting the privacy of everyone involved and would not be making further comment. Caroline read this email in her classroom during a free period, with 24 reading worksheets in front of her that needed marking. She put her phone face down. She picked up a red pen. She started marking. Oliver read Philip's piece on his break, in a small room behind the ceremonial hall, on his phone, in the particular silence of a person reading something about themselves. He read the paragraph about Lily. He sat with it for a moment. He had not known about Lily when he bowed. He had known nothing about Caroline Marsh as a person, as a history, as a woman with a reason. He had only known what her body told him, which was that she was carrying something of great weight with great care, and that she had earned whatever position she chose to hold herself in. He read that paragraph one more time. He thought so that was it. He thought, of course. He put his phone in his pocket and went back to work, back to the corridor and the uniform and the measured walk, and the job that most days was routine, and which on one particular afternoon had been the most important thing he had ever done, for reasons he had felt before he had understood them, which was maybe the only way important things ever get done. The day continued. The world continued. And in a classroom in East London, Caroline Marsh sat with 24 worksheets and a red pen, and the ordinary, essential work of teaching 6-year-olds that letters made sounds and sounds made words and words were the beginning of everything. And she did not look at her phone, and she did not read the comments, and she did not watch the number on Grace Whitfield's post climbing steadily toward 1 million. She marked the worksheets. She made notes in the margins. She wrote "good work" next to a sentence a child had constructed with enormous effort from 7 letters and a full stop. She meant it. She always meant it. That was the whole point. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at Caroline's school. It was addressed to her specifically, care of the school with her name spelled correctly and her subject listed beneath it, teacher of reading, which meant whoever sent it had looked her up, had found the staff page, had taken the time to write it out properly. The package was not large. It was wrapped in brown paper and sealed with tape, and there was no return address on the outside. She opened it in the staff room. Inside was a book. It was a very old book, a proper old one, the kind with a faded cloth cover and pages that had gone the color of strong tea and a smell that lived in the back of the nose and did not leave quickly. The title, pressed into the cover in letters that had lost their gold, was a survey of English civic architecture, published in 1931. There was a note inside the cover. It was handwritten. It said, "I thought she would have liked this. I hope it finds you well." There was no signature. Caroline stood in the staff room with the book in her hands for a long time. Then she sat down. Then she opened it. The first page was a photograph, black and white, of a civic hall in Birmingham, an enormous Victorian building with columns and arched windows and the particular pride of an era that believed in the public use of grandeur. The caption below read, Built 1879. Architect, unknown. She turned the pages slowly. Building after building, hall after hall, church, library, station, gallery. The whole long record of people deciding that the places where they gathered should be beautiful, should be significant, should be worth stopping in the middle of a sentence to look at. She thought about Lily. She thought about the way Lily would have turned these pages, the specific speed of her, not slow, not fast, the focused, unhurried pace of someone who is genuinely inside the thing they are looking at. She closed the book. She held it in both hands. She thought somebody knew about her. She thought somebody sent this. She thought, of course. She put the book in her tote bag, next to the small embroidered apple, and she went back to her classroom. She did not tell anyone about the package. She did not post about it. She did not call Philip Holt. She put the book on the shelf above her desk at home, beside the photograph of Lily that she kept there, the one from a Sunday afternoon in the countryside, Lily in a yellow coat, head tipped back, laughing at something just outside the frame, looking alive the way only people who are fully alive look, with the unguarded completeness of someone who does not yet know they will one day need to be remembered. The book sat beside the photograph. She stood in front of both of them for a moment. She said out loud to no one, "He saw it. He saw what you were somehow." She was not sure that made sense. She was not sure it needed to. Oliver Crane, 3 weeks after the corridor, had resumed his ordinary life with the deliberate discipline of a man who understood that the world's attention had a short memory and that patience was the appropriate response to notoriety you did not seek. He went to work. He did his job. He deflected the remaining press inquiries through official channels and did not respond to the ones that reached him privately. He did his grocery shopping. He called his grandmother on Sunday evenings. He had sent the book on a Tuesday afternoon, picked up from a second-hand shop he had passed on his walk home, a narrow place between a dry cleaner and a phone repair shop, the kind of shop that smells of dust and paper and time. He had been walking past with no intention of stopping, and then he had seen it in the window, this old survey of civic architecture, and he had thought of the woman in the corridor and the expression on her face, and he had gone inside, and he had bought it. He had not put his name on the note. He had not thought about whether she would know it was him. He had just sent it, because it seemed like the correct thing, the same reason he had bowed. And on a Saturday morning, 4 weeks after the corridor, Caroline Marsh went for her usual long walk. She walked the route she always walked, along the canal and up through the park and back around the long way, the route that took about 90 minutes and that she had done every Saturday since the November that had changed her because Lily had loved long walks, and because movement was the only thing that felt honest when the weight of stillness got too heavy. She walked without her phone. She walked without earphones. She walked the way she always walked, upright, hands in her coat pockets, eyes forward, her spine doing the thing it had learned to do, which was hold. The canal was full of weekend people, families and dogs and couples and lone runners, everyone doing their Saturday thing, the ordinary beautiful business of people being alive in a city that is large enough to hold all of it at once. She did not think about the video. She did not think about Philip's piece or the comments or the school emails or the book on the shelf. She thought about the light on the water. She thought about the angle of it. She thought Lily would have had something to say about that. She thought, yes, she would have. She walked the rest of the way home with the thought of Lily beside her, not as grief exactly, not anymore, but as presence, as the particular shape that a loved person takes in your interior life when you have spent long enough carrying them, when they have become not a wound but a weight you have learned to balance, the kind that keeps you low to the ground and deliberate and entirely present in the way that only people carrying something real are present. She came home. She made tea. She sat by the window. She looked at the light on the chimney stacks of the houses across the street. She held the mug in both hands, and she sat with everything she had and everything she had lost and everything she was still, somehow, here to be. And she did not bow to any of it, and she did not fold. And the morning came all the way in through the window and found her there, sitting upright, wholly herself, still standing. And in the book on the shelf, between her and the photograph of Lily in the yellow coat, the pages held their buildings, all those civic halls and libraries and stations built by people who believed that the places where we gather should mean something. Lily would have loved every one of them. That was enough. That would always be enough.